It started as a simple visit, nothing more than a casual afternoon at my best friend's new house. I had no idea that stepping through that door would change everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. What began with polite smiles and small talk slowly unfolded into something I never expected, something I couldn't ignore, even when I tried. I walked into the house with an easy smile, pretending like it was just another visit, but deep down I already felt something different about this place. My friend had been talking for weeks about how his dad finally bought this new home, bigger and brighter than the old one, and how it was supposed to be a fresh start for him. As soon as I stepped inside, I could smell the faint scent of fresh paint mixed with the warm aroma of coffee drifting from the kitchen. The rooms felt wide and welcoming, sunlight pouring in through tall windows, bouncing across walls that still looked untouched. My friend was excitedly dragging me from room to room, showing me everything as if he owned it himself, but every time his dad walked by, my attention slipped. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm but quietly tired, as if life had forced him to wear a mask of strength even when he was worn out inside, that he smiled at me in passing, one of those gentle smiles that hold more warmth than words ever could, and I found myself wanting to understand him more than I should have. I tried not to stare, but it wasn't easy. His voice lingered in the air long after he spoke, deep and steady, with a softness that made me feel oddly safe. He asked simple questions, if I wanted a drink, if I felt comfortable, if I needed anything, but there was something in the way he looked at me, as if he was truly interested in the answer. My friend, completely unaware of the tension building in me, kept running up and down the stairs, laughing and joking about how the new house was going to be a bachelor pad for him. But in that moment, it wasn't my friend's laughter that stayed with me, it was the subtle presence of his father, quietly moving through the house like someone still learning how to live again. The living room became our resting spot after the tour, and while my friend scrolled on his phone, his dad sat down across from me and started a small conversation. He asked about school, about my family, about my plans for the future, and though it sounded casual, the way he listened was anything but. Every word I said seemed to matter to him, and I found myself opening up more than I normally would. My voice wavered at times because I wasn't used to someone his age actually hearing me, not just waiting for their turn to speak. I noticed the lines on his face, not just marks of age but evidence of a man who had lived, who had carried weight and pain and yet still chose to keep moving forward. There was a sadness in his eyes that he didn't try to hide, and maybe that's why I trusted him so quickly. It felt like looking at someone who knew what it meant to be broken and still stand tall. The afternoon stretched slowly, like time itself was letting me breathe in the comfort of the house. My friend eventually went outside to call someone, leaving me alone with his father for a few minutes. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was thick but calming, like we both understood there was something we didn't dare say out loud. He asked me if I liked the place, and I told him it felt like home already. He chuckled softly, shaking his head, saying he wasn't sure he even knew what home meant anymore, but that he hoped this house could be a new beginning. The words stayed with me. I watched him as he leaned back, sipping his coffee, his eyes not meeting mine, almost as if he was scared to show me the full depth of whatever he was carrying inside. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just curious about him, I wanted to know every part of what made him the man he was. As the day went on, I kept catching myself observing the little details, the way his hand gripped the mug, the way his shoulders shifted when he laughed, how his gaze would soften when it landed on his son, filled with pride but also guilt, as though he felt he hadn't done enough. My chest tightened with feelings I couldn't explain, a mix of admiration, longing, and fear. It wasn't supposed to be like this, not with him, not here. But every time he looked at me, even briefly, I felt a pull I couldn't ignore. I didn't dare let it show. Instead, I smiled, laughed when my friend cracked jokes, acted like nothing was different. Yet inside me, something had already started to change, quietly but deeply. That night as I left the house, my friend walked me to the door while his dad stood a little behind, his expression soft but unreadable. He thanked me for coming, his voice low, almost hesitant, as though he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. I carried that moment with me as I walked away, the sound of his voice echoing in my head, the image of his kind but lonely eyes burned into me. I told myself it was just a simple visit, that I was overthinking everything. But when I lay in bed later that night, staring at the ceiling, all I could think about was him, the quiet strength he carried, the way he made me feel seen in ways I never expected. And deep down, I already knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something I couldn't walk away from, no matter how much I told myself I should. The next time I came over, it didn't feel like I was just visiting a friend anymore. Something about the house had already started to hold me in a way I couldn't explain. My friend was his usual self, full of energy and jokes, but I noticed his dad more than anything else. He greeted me with that calm smile again, one that seemed practiced but still genuine, and for a second I forgot how to respond. We sat in the living room for a while, my friend flipping through TV channels and talking about pointless things, but I was distracted by the way his father carried himself. Every time he spoke, I felt like his voice filled the entire room, and every glance made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't put into words. It wasn't long before my friend decided to head out for a bit, saying he needed to pick something up from a store nearby. He told me to stay, like it was nothing, and before I could even think of a reason to leave with him, he was gone. Suddenly it was just me and his dad in the room, and the silence felt heavier than it should have. He asked if I was okay, if I wanted something to drink, and I nodded, trying to act casual, but inside I was nervous in a way I had never been before. He brought me a glass of water and sat down across from me, his eyes catching mine for just a little too long before looking away. We started talking, slowly at first. He asked about school again, but then the questions grew deeper. He wanted to know what I dreamed of, what I wanted to do with my life. I told him things I hadn't even admitted to my closest friends, about feeling stuck, about wanting more but being afraid of failing. He listened without interrupting, leaning forward slightly, like every word I said mattered to him. When he finally spoke, his words surprised me. He told me he understood exactly what it felt like to want to escape your own skin sometimes, to want to be someone stronger, braver, freer. He admitted that he had spent years of his life pretending to be happy, staying in a marriage that broke him down piece by piece, until he couldn't carry it anymore. I could see the weight in his eyes as he spoke, the way his past had shaped him, and for the first time, he wasn't just my friend's dad to me. He was a man who had scars, a man who knew what it felt like to live in silence. The more he spoke, the more I felt drawn in. His honesty was disarming, and I couldn't help but feel safe opening up to him in return. I told him about feeling out of place sometimes, about not fitting into the boxes people expected me to. My voice cracked when I admitted that I often felt invisible, like no one really saw me for who I was. He didn't laugh or brush it off. He just nodded, his eyes softening as he leaned back, saying quietly, "I see you." Those 3 words hit me harder than I expected. No one had ever said them like that before, not with such conviction, not in a way that made me believe it. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, filled with things neither of us dared to say out loud. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, and when I looked at him again, I caught the same hesitation in his expression. There was a longing there, something he was trying to bury, but it was impossible to miss. For a moment I wondered if I was imagining it, if my mind was creating something that wasn't there, but deep inside I knew it wasn't just me. He looked at me the way I looked at him, curious, cautious, but undeniably drawn. Time seemed to move differently in that room. Our conversation drifted into small details, favorite books, music, the little things we never thought anyone else would care about. He laughed softly when I admitted to some guilty pleasures, and that laugh felt like it wrapped around me. It wasn't the laughter of someone being polite. It was genuine, the kind that makes you want to hear it again just to feel that spark in your chest. At one point he reached out, just briefly, his hand brushing against mine as he handed me my glass. It was nothing, just a simple touch, but it sent a rush through me that I couldn't hide. before I could process it, my friend returned, loud and carefree as always, breaking the fragile moment we had been building. His dad leaned back quickly, putting on the same calm mask he always wore, and I tried to do the same, forcing a smile as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I could still feel the weight of his words lingering inside me, the echo of that quiet admission that he saw me when no one else did. That night when I got home, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. His voice, his eyes, the way he had listened to me, it was all there, haunting me in a way that felt both terrifying and comforting. I told myself it was just a moment, that I was reading too much into it, but deep down I knew better. Something had started between us, something unspoken but undeniable, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it was already a part of me. The next weekend came faster than I expected, and somehow I found myself back at the house again. My friend had invited me, and I told myself that's the only reason I was there, but the truth is I didn't even hesitate to say yes. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt the same warmth I had felt before, like the air itself had started to memorize me. His dad greeted me with that familiar gentle smile, and for a second I felt the same nervous rush wash over me, stronger now because of the last time we spoke. My friend was in his usual mood, excited, restless, bouncing around with plans, but eventually he announced that he would be heading out later that night for a small gathering and insisted I should stay over instead of walking home late. I agreed quickly, maybe too quickly, but I told myself it was only because it was convenient. The evening moved in pieces, full of laughter and chatter, but beneath it all, I could feel the weight of something waiting to surface. Dinner was simple, but the atmosphere wasn't. I sat at the table, watching his dad cook, the way his movements were so steady and practiced, like even in silence he carried a quiet rhythm. He made sure everyone was comfortable, but I noticed how he would glance at me every now and then, his eyes holding something I couldn't name. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was enough to make me wonder if he was feeling the same tension I was. My friend kept joking through the meal, and we both laughed, but under the laughter, there was this hum of unspoken truth between me and his dad, lingering in every pause. Later that night, after my friend had left for his gathering, the house fell quiet. I was in the living room scrolling through my phone when his dad walked in and sat down near me. The silence was heavier this time, but not uncomfortable, more like both of us knew what was sitting there between us, waiting. He asked me if I was enjoying myself, if I felt okay staying over, and I nodded, but my voice felt stuck in my throat. I wanted to say more, to tell him how much his presence alone was affecting me, but I couldn't. He leaned back, sighing, and after a pause, he started talking about his life again. This time he went deeper. He told me about how the divorce had broken him, how waking up alone every day was like a reminder of everything he had lost. He said he tried to be strong for his son, to act like it didn't matter, but at night the silence in the house was unbearable. I could hear the weight of his loneliness in every word, and my chest ached for him. He wasn't just some older man to me anymore, he was someone carrying wounds that never fully healed. I found myself confessing things I hadn't shared before, about my own fears of ending up alone, about not knowing who I really was sometimes, about feeling like I had to hide parts of myself. He listened, truly listened, his eyes fixed on me in a way that made me feel like no one else in the world mattered at that moment. The room felt smaller as we spoke, as if the walls were pulling us closer together. There were long stretches of silence between our words, but those silences spoke louder than anything. At one point, his eyes lingered on mine, and neither of us looked away. I could feel the electricity in the air, the pull of something we weren't supposed to admit but couldn't deny. My chest was tight, my palms sweating, but I didn't move. I stayed, locked in his gaze, until he finally smiled faintly, like he was letting me know he understood exactly what I couldn't say. That it was getting late, and he told me I could use the guest room upstairs. He showed me the way, walking just a step ahead, his voice low and calm as he explained where things were. When he turned to say goodnight, I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, hesitation, maybe fear, but also a softness that made my heart race. I wanted to reach out, to say something, but I held back. Instead, I lay in bed that night unable to sleep, the sound of his voice replaying in my head, the memory of his eyes burning into me. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the pull toward him growing stronger, louder, impossible to ignore. Sometime after midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. For a moment I thought it was my friend coming back, but the steps paused near my door. I held my breath, waiting, but the sound eventually moved away. Even that small moment made my heart race, my thoughts spiraling with questions I couldn't answer. Did he stop because he wanted to check on me? Did he want to say something? Or was I just imagining everything because of how badly I wanted it to be true? By the time morning came, I was exhausted from tossing and turning, but when I walked downstairs and saw him making breakfast, the tiredness didn't matter. He looked up at me, smiled softly, and said good morning like nothing had happened, but his eyes told me otherwise. There was something different in the way he looked at me now, something that made me feel like the distance between us was shrinking little by little. I sat at the table, pretending to focus on the food, but my mind was spinning with the truth. Something was happening here, slowly, quietly, and it was only a matter of time before it broke open. The morning felt different from the others, heavier somehow, as though the air itself carried a secret neither of us had spoken yet. My friend was still asleep upstairs, leaving the house in a kind of quiet that pressed against my skin. I wandered down the hallway, trying to shake the restless thoughts from the night before, but they clung to me stubbornly. When I passed the bathroom door, I hesitated, debating if I should shower now or wait until later. Something in me pushed forward, and I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The water was warm, spilling over my shoulders, washing away the fatigue, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside my chest. I couldn't stop replaying the way he had looked at me the night before, the way silence between us had felt too alive to ignore that I had barely settled into the rhythm of the water when I heard the faint creak of the door. My heart jumped, and before I could react, his voice came through softly, almost apologetically. He had thought the room was empty. My first instinct was panic, my mind racing with what my friend would think, what anyone would think, but then something inside me told me not to speak, not to run. I turned slightly, and through the fogged glass, I could see him standing there, frozen, unsure whether to step back or move forward. For a long moment we just stared, the sound of the shower filling the silence between us that I should have felt exposed, embarrassed, but instead there was a strange calmness in me, as though the moment we had both been avoiding was finally here. His eyes weren't harsh or judging, they carried the same softness I had seen before, the same longing he had tried so hard to bury. The hesitation in his expression was clear, but so was the pull, that unspoken connection that had been building since the first time he sat across from me and truly listened. He asked if I wanted him to leave, his voice unsteady, and I shook my head before I even realized I was moving. It wasn't a bold choice, not an invitation, just a quiet acceptance of what I had been feeling all along. That he stepped closer, his movements careful, almost trembling. The room was filled with steam, and it blurred everything around us, leaving only him and me, the world outside fading away. I could feel my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. When his hand brushed against my arm, I froze, but not from fear, because of how gentle it was, how deliberate, as if he was asking for permission without words. I didn't pull away. Instead, I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his presence wash over me just as the water did. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet breaking of barriers we had both kept up for too long. He whispered something I could barely hear over the shower, something about not wanting me to feel alone, about how he had been holding back. His words trembled, but his touch didn't. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the truth written across his face. He wasn't just acting on impulse. This was something he had been fighting, something he had been afraid to give into. And yet here he was, choosing to step closer instead of walking away. That I found myself moving too, not with certainty but with trust. Trust that he wouldn't hurt me, trust that whatever this was, it mattered. The closeness between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, like all the conversations we had shared had finally taken shape in reality. I could feel his breath mixing with the steam, warm and shaky, his eyes searching mine as if for reassurance. I didn't say anything, but I didn't need to. The silence between us was enough, it carried all the answers, time blurred in that space. I don't know how long we stayed like that, caught in the current of something neither of us had planned but both of us had wanted. It wasn't about crossing boundaries or breaking rules, it was about two people finding each other in the wreckage of loneliness, in the cracks of their own hidden fears. The shower became a kind of shelter, a place where we were stripped not just of clothes but of all the masks we had been wearing. When it was finally over, we didn't rush to fill the silence. He handed me a towel with a carefulness that almost broke me, his eyes softer than ever, but also heavy with the weight of what we had just done. I wrapped myself up, my hands trembling, not because I regretted it but because I knew my life had just shifted in a way I couldn't undo. He looked at me for a long time, his lips parting as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, he simply nodded, like a quiet promise that this wasn't meaningless, that it wasn't just a mistake. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. We avoided words, not out of shame but because anything we said would have been too small for what we felt. When my friend finally returned, laughing and carefree, I forced myself to smile as though nothing had happened, but inside, everything had changed. The secret was ours now, unspoken but alive, pulsing between us with every glance. And as I sat there, pretending to focus on my friend's stories, all I could think about was the moment in the shower, the moment where silence finally turned into something neither of us could deny. The hours after that morning felt like walking through a dream I couldn't wake up from. Everything seemed normal on the surface, my friend was laughing, making plans for the day, acting like nothing in the world had shifted, but underneath, everything in me had. I couldn't look at his dad without feeling the weight of what we had shared in that shower. Every glance, every small movement carried a meaning that words couldn't touch. He avoided my eyes most of the day, keeping himself busy in the kitchen or outside, but even in that distance I could feel him thinking about it too. It wasn't something either of us could pretend hadn't happened. It was there between us, alive, heavy, impossible to erase. By the afternoon, my friend had gone out again to meet someone, leaving me behind in the house. I told myself I should leave too, but when I heard his dad moving around in the living room, I found myself walking toward him instead of the door. He was sitting quietly, staring at the muted television, though I could tell his mind was miles away. When I stepped in, he looked up, and for a second it was like time stopped. His eyes carried both worry and something deeper, something tender, something fragile. I sat down across from him, unsure how to begin, my chest tightening with every second of silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than usual, almost as if he was afraid of his own words. "I don't want you to think what happened was just a mistake," he said, his hands gripping the edge of the chair as though he needed to hold on to something. "I know it's complicated, and I know it's not what you expected, but I don't want you to walk away thinking it didn't mean anything. Because it did. It meant something to me." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been spinning all morning, caught between fear and wonder, and hearing him say that cracked something open in me. My throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't speak. When I finally found the courage, my voice shook. "It wasn't a mistake for me either," I whispered. "I don't know what it means, or where this goes, but it mattered." The relief in his expression was immediate, but so was the sadness. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, exhaling as though he had been holding his breath for hours. "I'm scared," he admitted softly. "Not of you. Not of how I feel. I'm scared of what happens if anyone finds out. I'm scared of what my son would think. But I can't lie to myself and pretend that being close to you doesn't make me feel alive again." I had no answer for that, no way to fix the storm in his words, but I knew one thing for certain, I didn't want to let this go. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, wanted in a way that wasn't shallow or passing. I told him that, my voice trembling but firm, and his eyes softened again, filling with something that looked a lot like hope. For the first time since that morning, he let himself smile at me, not the practiced polite smile he usually wore, but a real one, the kind that made me feel like I had broken through his walls. The rest of the evening passed quietly. We didn't say much, but we didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was steady, like the calm after a storm. When my friend returned later, he didn't notice anything different, and I found myself laughing at his jokes, eating dinner with them, playing the part of normality. But every time I looked across the table and met his father's eyes, even for a second, I felt that connection pulse through me. We didn't have to speak about it. It was there, solid and undeniable, a thread tying us together in ways no one else could see. That night I lay in bed, unable to sleep again, but this time the restlessness wasn't from confusion, it was from certainty. I knew what I felt now. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just a moment of weakness in the shower. It was something bigger, something that scared me because of how real it was, but also something I couldn't imagine giving up. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt wanted. I felt important. And no matter how complicated the world outside might make it, I knew I couldn't let that go. As the house went silent, I thought about his words, about the fear and the hope tangled together in them. And I made a quiet promise to myself, that whatever this was, whatever it became, I would not run from it. Because what we shared wasn't just about desire or loneliness. It was about being seen, being understood, being alive in a way neither of us had felt in years. And I knew, with a certainty that scared me and thrilled me all at once, that this was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of pretending everything was normal while inside I felt anything but. I went about my life the same way, seeing my friend, laughing at the same jokes, going through the same routines, but every time I stepped into that house it felt like stepping into a different world. The air seemed heavier, filled with an unspoken bond that only I and his dad could feel. Even when we didn't speak directly, even when we stayed on opposite sides of the room, the connection was there like a quiet hum between us. He would glance at me sometimes, quickly looking away when my friend was near, and in those fleeting seconds I felt more than I had ever felt in long conversations with anyone else. It wasn't long before my friend went out again one evening, leaving the two of us behind. The moment the door shut behind him, the silence in the house grew louder, pressing in around us until one of us had to break it. He asked if I wanted to help him in the kitchen, and I followed, though I knew it wasn't really about cooking. We moved around each other in that small space, our shoulders brushing, our hands almost touching when we reached for the same things. Every moment felt charged, every glance longer than it should have been. Finally, he stopped, setting down the knife he had been using, and turned to face me. His expression was conflicted, torn between caution and something softer, something that made my chest ache. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on mine. "I don't know how to be around you without feeling everything I'm trying to hold back." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that being near him made me restless in the best and worst ways. Instead, I stepped closer, not too much, just enough to show him I wasn't afraid. "You don't have to hold back with me," I whispered, and the way his breath caught told me he had been waiting to hear those words even if he hadn't admitted it. From that moment on, things shifted. We began to spend more time together, not in obvious ways, but in stolen pockets of quiet. We talked for hours when my friend wasn't around, our conversations weaving from small memories to painful truths. He told me about the loneliness of his nights, about the pressure of being seen as strong when inside he felt fragile. I told him about the walls I had built to protect myself, about the fear of being judged, about never feeling like I belonged anywhere. In him, I found someone who didn't just listen but understood, who carried his own scars but still looked at me as though mine weren't something to be ashamed of. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when guilt pressed against me, when I wondered what would happen if my friend ever found out, if anyone did. But then there were moments when he would brush my hand as we passed in the hallway, or when his voice would soften just for me, and all the doubts melted away. Those moments weren't about breaking rules, they were about finding something real in a world that had always felt shallow. One evening we sat together on the porch, the summer air warm around us, the stars faint in the distance. He told me he hadn't felt this alive in years, that I made him remember what it was like to be more than just a father, more than just a man trying to rebuild his life. I told him I hadn't felt this safe in years, that he made me feel like I wasn't invisible anymore. There was no need for grand declarations, the truth was in the quiet way we looked at each other, in the space we chose to share without fear, but the secrecy was heavy. Every time my friend walked into the room, I felt the need to hide, to pull back, to act like nothing was happening. I could see the same strain in his dad's eyes, the conflict between wanting to protect his son and wanting to be honest about what we were becoming. The weight of it sat between us, unspoken but undeniable, and though neither of us wanted to think too far ahead, we both knew we couldn't hide forever. Still, in the quiet moments we shared, the fear didn't matter. When he placed a plate of food in front of me and let his fingers brush against mine just a second too long, when he looked at me with that mixture of tenderness and longing, when we sat side by side in silence that felt more intimate than words, those were the moments that reminded me why I couldn't walk away. What we had was fragile, complicated, and risky, but it was also real, maybe the realest thing I had ever felt. And for now, that was enough. That night when I left, his eyes followed me to the door, and I knew without him saying a word that he was thinking the same thing I was, that this secret was growing into something neither of us could control. And yet, despite the risks, neither of us wanted to stop. The weight of secrecy began to press harder the more time passed. What had started as glances and quiet moments was now something deeper, something that filled every corner of my thoughts. It was impossible to sit at the same table with my friend without feeling the heaviness of his father's gaze from across the room, impossible to laugh at his jokes without sensing the tension hidden beneath the surface. The bond we had built was no longer just a quiet understanding, it was becoming love, and with love came the fear of being discovered. My friend was sharp in his own way, and it didn't take long before he began to notice how the air shifted when I was around. He made offhand comments about how comfortable I seemed with his dad, about how often I came by, laughing them off as jokes, but I could hear the suspicion underneath. Every time he said something like that, I felt my stomach twist, my heart beating so loud I was sure it gave me away. One evening, the three of us sat in the living room, the television flickering with some movie none of us were really watching. My friend dozed off midway through, his head falling back on the couch, his breaths deep and even. That left me and his dad again in that dangerous silence, both of us too aware of what had happened before and what lingered now. He looked at me with tired eyes, filled with conflict. I knew the same thoughts were burning through him. What would happen if his son woke up? What would happen if anyone ever knew? The fear sat heavy in the room, but so did something else, the undeniable pull between us. Later, when I went to get some water in the kitchen, he followed me. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge, and his voice was low when he finally spoke. "We can't keep doing this in silence," he said, his hands trembling slightly as he rested them on the counter. "He's going to notice. Someone will. And when that happens, everything will fall apart. I don't want to lose you, but I can't lose him either." Hearing those words tore through me. My chest tightened because I knew he was right. We were standing in the middle of something fragile, a place where love and risk were tangled so tightly that I couldn't tell one from the other anymore. But at the same time, I couldn't bear the thought of letting it go. My voice cracked when I answered, barely more than a whisper. "I don't want to hide, but I don't want to hurt him either. What are we supposed to do?" He stepped closer, his eyes filled with pain and tenderness all at once. "I don't know," he admitted. "But what I do know is that I care about you more than I ever thought I could. And pretending it's not real doesn't make it go away. It only makes it harder. That night we didn't share a kiss, or a touch, or anything physical at all. We simply stood there, two people weighed down by a truth too heavy to carry but too powerful to deny. When I went to bed in the guest room, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying his words, the way his voice shook when he admitted how much he cared. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was love, raw and terrifying, and it was written all over the way he looked at me. The next day, my friend confronted me in a way that made my heart nearly stop. We were sitting outside when he casually said, "You and my dad seem really close lately. Closer than usual. Is there something I should know?" He said it with a grin, but his eyes searched mine with sharp curiosity. I forced a laugh, shaking my head, pretending not to understand, but inside I was unraveling. His words were a reminder that our secret was no longer safe, that the walls were closing in around us. Later that night, when I found myself alone with his dad again, the fear came pouring out of me. "He's noticing," I whispered, my hands shaking. "What if he finds out? What if he hates me? What if he hates you?" My voice broke, and before I could stop it, tears slipped down my face. He reached for me then, not caring about the risk, pulling me into his arms with a tenderness that undid me completely. His hand rested on the back of my head as he whispered, "You don't have to be afraid. If this is real, and it is, then we can face whatever comes. I won't let you face it alone." That promise, whispered in the quiet of the night, was the most powerful thing he had ever given me. It was no longer about hiding or pretending. It was about choosing each other, even in the face of fear. We sat there in silence, holding on to each other like the world outside didn't exist, and in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that no matter what storm was coming, I couldn't walk away. He had become my safe place, my anchor, and even if the truth shattered everything else, I was willing to fight for what we had found. The storm finally came on a night that felt no different from the others, yet everything about it changed the course of what we had been building. My friend had invited me over for dinner, the same casual invitation as always, but the moment I stepped inside, I could feel the tension hanging thick in the air. He was quieter than usual, his jokes shorter, his eyes sharper, and I noticed how often they flicked between me and his dad. Every glance felt like a test, and I knew in my gut that he had pieced together more than either of us wanted him to. We sat at the table, the three of us pretending to eat, but the silence was heavy. Then, in a sudden break that left me frozen, he set his fork down with a loud clink and leaned forward. "I'm not stupid," he said, his voice steady but full of heat. "I see the way you two look at each other. Do you think I wouldn't notice? Tell me the truth, what's going on?" My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. His dad tried to speak, but the words got caught in his throat. I stared down at my plate, the shame and fear twisting inside me like knives. My friend's voice cracked the air again, sharper this time. "So it's true. You've been sneaking around behind my back. Both of you." The pain in his tone was worse than anger. It was betrayal, raw and unfiltered, and it made me feel like the ground had been ripped from under my feet. His dad finally spoke, his voice calm but heavy. "It's not what you think. This wasn't planned. It wasn't about betraying you. It just happened." But those words didn't ease the wound, they only made it deeper. My friend pushed back from the table, his eyes filled with hurt. "You're my father. And you," his gaze turned to me, cutting through me like glass. "You were supposed to be my best friend. How could you both do this to me?" I wanted to explain, to tell him that what we shared wasn't a game, that it wasn't some careless mistake. But the words wouldn't come. All I could do was sit there, trapped between two people I cared about more than anything, watching the bond one had treasured begin to unravel. His dad stood then, trying to reach for him, but my friend recoiled, his voice shaking as he shouted, "Don't touch me. I can't even look at you right now." He stormed out of the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving behind a silence that burned. The weight of that moment settled heavily between the two of us. His dad sank back into his chair, his hands covering his face, his shoulders trembling with a grief I had never seen in him before. "I've ruined everything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've failed as a father, and I've hurt you too." I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over his, my own heart splitting in two. "You haven't ruined everything," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We can't undo what's happened, but we can be honest now. We can try to make it right." The days that followed were filled with distance and silence. My friend avoided both of us, his absence louder than any words. I stayed away, giving him space, though every moment apart felt like a knife in my chest. His dad and I spoke less too, not because we didn't care, but because the guilt was so heavy it choked every sentence before it could be said. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. What we had wasn't built on lies, it was built on connection, on truth, and even if it hurt now, I believed it could heal. Eventually, my friend called me. His voice was cold, but there was something softer beneath it, something that told me he was at least willing to listen. He didn't want excuses. He didn't want promises. He just wanted honesty. And for the first time, I told him everything, the loneliness, the connection, the love I hadn't expected but couldn't ignore. His silence on the other end of the line stretched on forever, but when he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I don't understand it. I don't know if I ever will. But if it's real, if you're both telling me the truth, then I don't want to lose either of you. I just need time." That was the beginning of healing. Not easy, not simple, but real. With time, the anger softened. With time, he began to see that this wasn't about betrayal, it was about finding love where we never expected it. And slowly, piece by piece, we began to rebuild. His dad and I were careful, patient, and always mindful of the pain that lingered, but we didn't give up. Love had grown in the most unlikely of places, and though it had shaken us all, it had also taught us what it meant to be honest, to fight for something true, and to believe that even in brokenness, healing was possible. In the end, it wasn't about hiding anymore. It wasn't about shame or guilt. It was about standing in the open, hearts bare, knowing that what we had was worth the struggle. The bond between me and his dad didn't erase the pain, but it gave us the strength to face it. And though the road ahead wasn't clear, I knew we were walking it together, and that made all the difference.